Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, both for the invitation and for the very kind introduction. As I see it, there are only two of us on the panel. As I see it, we've got two choices. Either the two of us could talk very, very slowly for our presentations, or we could do it at the regular pace and adjourn early to the bar. Now, if I were in the audience, I know which one of the two I would choose. I'm easy, but I know which one I would choose. Let me start this way by saying that it must have been, I guess, around 10 years ago that I remember being invited to go down to Hamilton to speak at a seminar that was being held on the issue of skills. I flew down from Ottawa to Mount Hope Airport. In those days, there was a direct flight. I remember being picked up by the ubiquitous taxi driver that we've all heard about with the PhD or with a professional degree of one sort or another. And he recognized me and he said, "What brings you to Hamilton?" When I said it was to talk to a conference about skills, he said to me, "Let me tell you my story." He said, "I came here, it was from the Middle East, 15 or 20 years ago. I'd been trained as a professional. I believe he was an engineer, but it was a professional degree that he had. Before coming, I waited a matter of years before being able to come to Canada. I had a number of different interviews at the Canadian Embassy where they looked at what my skills were and whether or not I could make a contribution to the Canadian economy. Then I came to Canada and I found I wasn't going to be allowed to put my skills to work because my degree wasn't recognized." He left me with this question. He said, "I have a family now. I don't have the luxury of going back to school and upgrading my skills and getting certified. I believe in the dignity of work, that what I do, I'm proud to be working and contributing. But I have just this one question. Why did you keep asking me about what my skills were if you weren't going to allow me to put them to work once I got to Canada?" I had no good answer for that. And what struck me right at that moment was that we have to recognize in Canada that no matter how wealthy we are not so rich as a nation that we can afford to waste the skills of anybody who wants to help us to build this country. We need to find ways to tapping into those skills and using them effectively. I was disturbed a couple of years later when I read an article, I believe it was in the Toronto Star, looking at the number of immigrants. They were looking particularly at young males between 25 and 40, sort of prime employment age. The number who re-emigrated from Canada within 2 years of coming to Canada, the figure was high, and the reason that they gave was lack of opportunity here in Canada. Then, a couple of years later, I was in Nanjing, in China, at a conference, and found myself seated beside a woman who said, "My husband and I are actually landed immigrants in Canada. We came to the Toronto area a few years ago and as landed immigrants, and discovered that my husband, who has a university degree, wasn't able to find work in Canada, so we came home to China in search of economic opportunity." This is a very sad commentary on us as a nation and of our ability to put to work and to tap into the skills of people who want to join us and help us build this country. Let me make just one other comment before getting into my more formal remarks, and that's, there's a lot of discussion these days about immigration and Canadian values. We've all heard it. When we're making a list of Canadian values, right at the top of that list should be that Canadians believe that this country should continue to be what it's been for 150 years. A refuge for people looking to create a new life of freedom and opportunity for themselves and for their families. And that we recognize that as Canadians, that at a time when the rest of the world are closing their doors to people from outside their countries, that we are the beneficiaries in inviting people from around the world to come to Canada to help us to make this a better and a stronger country. What brings people today to Canada is not markedly different from what brought my family from Ireland back in the 1820s. It's a chance either to live in political and religious freedom, or it's a chance simply to have economic opportunity for our children that we perhaps weren't able to enjoy ourselves, and to build a better life for our families. Those have been the driving factors that have brought people here all of these years. And they're the factors that continue to bring people today and that continue to make this country so attractive. We must not forget those values, and we must not turn away from them. We must not start closing doors in Canada. Instead, what we need to do is to do a much better job of making sure that the people whom we bring to Canada are fully integrated into Canada's economy and into our society, and have the opportunity to participate fully in the Canadian dream in exactly the same way as we would expect for ourselves and for our families. And we don't do an adequate job of doing that. We do a very good job in terms of opening the doors and saying to people, come to Canada. We use the word, I don't like, tolerant. Suggests that there's a bad smell in the room that we're putting up with the word tolerating. We have to be much more than simply tolerant of our differences. We should be celebrating our differences and seeing them as a source of strength. That the diversity that we have in Canada is something that makes us richer and more successful as a nation. I listened a couple of years ago to Professor Richard Florida give a speech where he talked about doing comparisons between Canada and other countries around the world in terms of what are the competitive advantages that one country or another has. He said when he looked at it, more than in anything else, when he looked particularly at the Greater Toronto area, he said the most important factor that we had, a great competitive advantage, was our diversity. It is our willingness to accept people on a come-as-you-are basis. Professor Florida, who wrote the books, The Rise of the Creative Class, The Flight of the Creative Class, made the point that when you look at Silicon Valley, what attracts brilliant minds to go to California is that come-as-you-are nature. You're not required to leave part of yourself behind. You're encouraged to come and to express yourself and to be as diverse as possible. That's an attractiveness that makes our country appealing to the best minds anywhere in the world, to come to Canada and to find that we celebrate who we are and we celebrate the richness of our national fabric. And when you take a look at one of the areas where I think we've fallen short, is we have no strategy in Canada for capitalizing on the fact that we have one of the most diverse societies anywhere in the world. Our approach is essentially, let's open the doors, you're welcome here, glad you're here, good luck to you. Rather than, what do we do now that we're fortunate you're here, how do we ensure that you can participate fully in our society, that you feel fully at home, and that we leverage the advantages that come from your presence here. Let's take a look at the GTA in particular. Every country's first-generation diaspora, speaking the language, understanding the culture, with a network of friends and family back home, entrepreneurial by nature. That is, when you leave everything that you have back home to make a new life in Canada on the other side of the world, then there's something pretty entrepreneurial about what you're doing. Yet we have no strategy in Canada that looks upon this first-generation diaspora of the rest of the world as an economic resource that we should be using more effectively to boost our relations with the rest of the world, to encourage trade and to encourage interplay between ourselves and the rest of the world. So those are just some couple of personal comments in setting the tone. First of all, let me simply describe the Canadian Chamber. Many of you are aware of Chambers of Commerce, but this is Chamber 101. I speak for a network of 450 local chambers and boards of trade across the country, representing 200,000 businesses, every size, every sector, every region of the country. It's literally Main Street Canada. And in my work, I constantly hear about the day-to-day challenges being faced by businesses. By far the single biggest issue that they face is how to find the right people to do the jobs that will help them grow their businesses and strengthen our economy. That's why it's so important that they have the capacity to tap into the enormous pool of global talent that wants to find work and to make a living, and especially if they want to find it in a peaceful and inclusive country like Canada. Now, unfortunately, connecting international workers to Canadian jobs as you well know, is not always a simple matter. This brings us to the topic of the conference. The question of how to successfully integrate newcomers into our workplaces is what could make or break our economy. Bringing international talent into a business can have many advantages. They have a knowledge of another language and culture that can help open doors, find suppliers, or avoid pitfalls abroad. Their fresh perspective can help bring a new outlook to a business and shake up the status quo. Their experiences can spur innovation and change the frame of mind of their colleagues. After all, there are only so many times you can hear about hockey analogies on leadership before they begin to lose their meaning. They may be different once you hear your colleague from Ghana tell you that an army of sheep led by a lion can defeat an army of lions led by a sheep. In order to leverage these advantages of cultural diversity, however, we have to start by looking at what we can do to make these new colleagues feel welcome in our businesses. Now, integration is something that we have a lot of experience with here in Canada. It's something we're often happy to do and that we're usually good at doing. However, there have been too many exceptions. Around the world, the tensions between immigration and the economy are at the center of many political debates. People are scared that the economy will not grow. They're scared of their jobs moving elsewhere. They're scared that newcomers to their country will bring down their standard of living or steal their jobs. It's our responsibility to address those fears thoughtfully. We have to give credible answers that show a path forward, and ignoring them is not an option, or dismissing them is not being worthy of being addressed. That's not a credible option. I'm firmly on the side of supporting the movement of talent and of goods around the world. History has taught us the enormous benefits that come from trade. It's also shown us the economic pain that can come from closing ourselves off from the rest of the world. Our country has always depended on trade, whether it's in furs, wheat, oil and gas, or the latest apps. We can't isolate ourselves from global markets. We can't isolate ourselves from the global movement of people either, nor should we want to. Throughout every generation, newcomers have brought their drive to succeed, and they've enriched our country. Despite this economic advantage, despite the natural hurdles that international recruitment represents, cost, distance, logistics, and so on, government regulations still add an additional barrier. The labor market impact assessment process was intended as a measure to avoid displacement of Canadian workers. But when it comes to high-skilled positions, it doesn't always reflect the positive spin-offs that come from getting skilled workers into the country. Not for temporary workers, and certainly not for the permanent ones who need a pathway to citizenship. The benefits from even a single talented international worker can be tremendous. One of our members tells me the story of hiring a brand new developer who led to the creation of almost 150 new Canadian jobs as a spin-off of their work. On the other hand, another employer was refused permission to bring in the best person they could find. They hired him anyway because he was the person they needed. He had to work in the United States, and spin-off jobs were added to the American economy instead of here in Canada. How did this foster in any way the Canadian public interest to not allow that person into Canada? It's an example of a measure that undermines the very reason why it was put into place. Instead of bringing jobs to Canadians, it prevents them from being created here. Now, the government has taken steps to address the problem. They've announced their global skills strategy to set a faster standard for visas. They're looking to speed up labor market assessments as well. Now, these measures should both help accelerate the process of bringing in the kind of talent that's needed to fill the gaps in our labor market. They've also recently announced changes to the express entry system. Speeding up the process for admitting permanent residents is just as important as admitting temporary workers. Now, thanks to these new changes, many applicants will receive credit for job offers without a labor market impact assessment. This recognizes that employers are already the best judges for whether a new worker will succeed in the Canadian workplace. After all, they are the Canadian workplace. Employers look for these employees who bring unique skills, who are a good cultural fit for their organizations, and will be successful. These are the very attributes that make a newcomer successful in Canada in general. It only makes sense to give job offers a prominent place in the application process. The government's also taking steps to tap another asset for successful permanent residency. Those are the international students who've completed degrees at Canadian institutions. They will now receive bonus points on their applications for Canadian degrees and diplomas. We already attract hundreds of thousands of the world's best and brightest to our schools. And the quality of applicants is apt to go even higher in coming years as we find that other countries who may have been on the priority list previously, countries like the United States or Great Britain, start to close their doors. Increasingly, Canada is going to be the destination of choice for the best students anywhere in the world. This is an enormous asset to us. It'd be a waste not to offer them a chance to stay after they've already shown the ability to live and succeed here. Up until this past spring, I was Chancellor of the University of Ontario Institute of Technology. As far as I was concerned, if we graduated a student in the morning assembly, in the morning convocation, they could pass a security check at lunchtime, I would offer them the ability to work in Canada by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. What are employers looking for? They're looking for somebody trained to Canadian standards, able to speak English or French, understanding the milieu in which they're operating. That, to me, is the definition of an international student trained at a Canadian institution. What a tremendous resource this is for Canada, as it is even if people go home, again with their network of friends and colleagues in Canada, interested in Canada, trained to Canadian standards, often on Canadian equipment, and maintaining that connection to Canada. We can do much more to take advantage of that. An example was the St. Catharines Chamber of Commerce, which a few years ago, I don't know whether they still do it, I think it was with Brock, their local university, would hold a reception for international students with the business community to give the opportunity for the international students to get to know some of the local businesses and for local businesses to get to know what sort of talent was available among the international students in the area. What's that cost? Nothing. What are the opportunities? The opportunities are enormous, both for the students and for the businesses involved. So there's a great opportunity for us as it relates to international students. Et ceci, bien entendu, s'applique dans nos 2 langues officielles, et encore plus lorsque les étudiants ont appris les 2 langues. These new measures show that the government has been listening to us, and more importantly, they're a signal that our country will continue to stand for openness and for trade in a world that's questioning both. Not only is that an important moral stance, it can be an important competitive advantage as well. But there's still more that needs to be done. The express entry changes don't apply to all job offers yet. Many job offers are not yet recognized, even if they're permanent and well paid. Applications are tied to an obsolete system of classifying jobs rooted in the factory economy more than in the digital economy. And our labor market information system often moves more slowly than the economy it tries to measure. Still, I don't want to focus on the negative when we have seen so much progress already. Our country's on the right track when it comes to welcoming talent. We can keep pushing for an open and welcoming economy. And if we're successful, we can continue to enjoy the prosperous society that openness and inclusiveness brings to us. Thanks so much.